we're going to talk about resiliency, what it doesn't mean, what it means, and how you might use that as a tool for living well. Resiliency is basically being able to ride the ups and downs of life with increasing capacity to make wiser, healthier choices for ourselves. Synonyms are things like flexibility and being elastic. So there are many ways that you can build on your own inclinations and need to becoming more resilient. It is, the one myth about it is that it's a trait. You're either born with it or you're not. People have it or they don't. And that's not true. We all have some level of resilience capacity, and we can build on that over the years. Resilient people are independent, tough-minded, and self-reliant. Also not true. Resilient people are immune to stress and negative emotions, that you build up so much resilience that nothing phases you. Of course that's not true. We all have hardships and adversities that happen. It's called life. And so your need to build on your resilience to cope with those things is possible. And then one of my least favorite ones is the idea that adversity makes people stronger. It's not the adversity that makes us stronger. It's being willing to experience it, ride the waves, when that means, I'll explain that with a diagram a little bit later, and to come out with a new normal that's acceptable and positively even better than what the old normal looked like. Resiliency is not bouncing back. A few of us over the age of 30 bounce back from hardly anything. We may come back, we may make our way back, we may move ahead, but it's not bouncing back. I think this is a mental picture I had of what those lift chairs would be like back in the day when Medicare was still paying for them. So who are resilient folk? What characteristic of people really makes them more able to become resilient to life circumstances? And generally it's people that are optimistic. They believe that the difficulty presented to them is not personal, permanent, nor pervasive. To some extent, these are people that tend to feel more in control of their own lives. I want to go back to the word optimism. I realize we're videotaped and it's not nearly as socially acceptable to quote Bill Cosby as it was 10 years ago. But Cosby told this story at a medical conference in Atlanta of coming from one of his graduate classes in his psychology training. And he stopped by his mom's house on the way home, and she said, "What did y'all discuss today? What did you talk about?" And he said, "Well," he said, "we spent 2.5 hours talking about the old debate between glass half full and glass half empty." And she said, "Well, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard." She said, "It totally depends on whether you're drinking or pouring." So resiliency makes you want to do and learn how to do some of both, where both drinking and pouring are possible to feel in control of your life. There are people who can handle uncomfortable feelings and uncertainty. Key is people willing to ask for help. It's the isolationists that don't do so good with life's adversities. People who can persevere and keep going through. It's people who experience things that weren't of their choosing or making, but figure out they can still go on. They're people who have or build close, dependable relationships. I am never more concerned with my Parkinson patients than when I realize that it's just him and him. You know, we talk a lot about caregiver roles. We talk about family support systems. We talk about support group systems like the APDA group in Iowa. But sometimes people are kind of closed off, and it really is just them, and it's a concern. So building those close relationships, savoring the moment, recognizing what's pretty around you, recognizing what's funny around you, and we'll come back to that, and maintaining the joy. Find meaning in what happens to them or to the people they love around them, and people who can learn to lead from those signature strengths. There's a lot of focus in Western culture on working on our weaknesses. Would you agree? And so that makes you always pulling from the bottom of the well, saying, well, maybe I'll quit doing this, or I'll do this less, instead of leading with our strengths. So the definition of a strength, a core signature strength, is a pre-existing. It means it's your nature. It's who you are at your best what you do that's easiest for you, a pre-existing capacity for a particular way of behaving, thinking, or feeling that is authentic and energizing and enables optimal function, development, and sense of well-being. So take a minute to ponder that just a little bit. Pre-existing capacity for a particular way of behaving, thinking, or feeling that will serve you well. It's using your strengths gives you the greatest potential for growth, whether in adversity or in good times. Understanding what your strengths are and which ones you hold are the first steps towards recognizing the greatness within you. Now, strengths sometimes have to be tempered. Heather and I worked on this slide together. So if I'm very organized, that's a good thing. My husband wishes I had that strength. It's not a strong suit for me. But many people have it. I love working with people who are organized. It sort of balances me out. But those same people can become quite annoying if their strength goes over the cliff. So that can become kind of OCD type tendency. The strength of persistence, of being able to keep on, can deteriorate into someone becoming relentless. They're not much fun to work with or live with either. So strengths can be to an extent that it's no longer a strong suit. But that's really not what we're going to focus on today. We're going to try to focus on using your personal strengths to get that balance you need to keep your equilibrium, even if you're going through a rough patch, or you're adjusting to a new or frustrating diagnosis, or you've got family or conflict issues with aging that are weighing on you sort of heavily, how you can get things back in balance or to a more optimal state. So event occurs. The Davis Phinney people helped me put together this wonderful slide here. So to your left, something happens in your life that is not to your liking and doesn't feel at first like it might be good. And then all these emotional sensations build. One of the ways people can cope with that is to jump off the wave. They just turn away. They can't think about it, so they work more hours. They have 2 gin and tonics at night instead of 1, or various mal-coping mechanisms that are not good to take their mind off the issue. The better money is on sitting with those sensations. As your own reaction build to something that's happening with you, the same man I was just telling the stories about was diagnosed, ironically enough, with Parkinson's disease about a year ago. And after he sat with that for a few weeks, he said to me, isn't it going to be interesting what the next chapter of our lives brings? So again, he has this uncanny ability to look for the positive or look for the opportunity, except it's not uncanny. It's natural to us when we can let it through. So for those of you who can learn to hang in, let yourself experience those emotions, take in or receive, the slide says, whatever new awarenesses it brings, maybe thinking about new opportunities that it brings. It gives you that really providential opportunity to respond to what's happened with you rather than react just instantly, emotionally, or negatively to that. Whoops. So change often creates anxiety, does it not? Particularly change that we did not invite. So this little acronym is that tool to ride those waves of life. To breathe, which Laura was just coaching us some in how to breathe. I've actually gotten quite good at that as a technique to manage my own blood pressure problems. So the people I work with, I don't know that they think of me as high-strung. Fortunately, they're not here to weigh in on that. But they may think of me as a little bit of a perfectionist or exacting or a time control freak. Any number of things come to my mind that could be strengths or not. But if they pass by my office window and they see me doing this, where I'm breathing into the count of 4 and then breathing out to the count of 4, which I do several times a day, nobody's going to mess with me when they see that going on. So breathing is important. Learning how to relax, and for me that breathing is part of that. How to take in those feelings instead of dodging them or sitting tight hoping they'll go away. Go ahead and experience that. Watch what's going on in yourself and in the people around you and in the circumstance that's evolving to see what you can glean from that, and then to just allow it to happen. I consult them with a care facility for cognitively impaired patients. Most of them are Alzheimer's patients. And One of the things they teach their staff, instead of all these things of how to cope with agitated behaviors, one of the first line choices is to allow the behavior. It will run itself out, if your patient's not hurting themselves or somebody else. And that was completely foreign to me when I first began the exercises with them. So riding the waves, building blocks for affirmation, or for resilience or affirmation, to nurture a positive way of looking at yourself. This can be as silly as sticking a sticky note on your mirror in the morning that say, you are way cooler than you knew. I am way cooler than anybody thinks, or whatever you want to say about yourself. So nurture a positive way to look at yourself that may have to be pretty mundane as you start learning these steps. Feed and water your relationships with significant others. If you have Parkinson's disease personally, I would invite you to get up every day with a repeat resolve to say something wonderful or do something wonderful to that person who lives with you and looks out for you 24/7. You can do that, and you can bring your best to that relationship every single day. Then to learn healthy coping strategies versus turning to self-destructive patterns. We've already talked about that some, I realize. So all of us know the things not to do to avoid the steps to a more resilient life, don't we? To share, reach out to help somebody else, that is a huge one. If you can't quite sort out where you are on one of those life waves that's throwing you and you can't get back up on your board, take some of your time and energy to do something for somebody else. Get involved with a support group. It doesn't have to be a Parkinson-related activity, but something where you're in an outreach ministry, so to speak. Reflect, take a minute daily to identify some highlight of your day, or I don't particularly like the phrase gratitude journal because with Oprah and a lot of other outreach efforts, it's become kind of trite. But you really only have to think of one thing, that as you're going to bed at night, you will remember to identify out loud, or at least write down, clarify in your mind, something that happened or that occurred that day that you are very grateful for. You can't go through the day in misery if you know you've got a job to look for one good thing. So it does help you look in that glass half full direction. And then you have to practice. To become more resilient, you have to hone your problem solving and communication skills, and you have to work on that every single day. It takes 21 days to make a new habit for most of us. I'm not sure, I'd be interested in Matt Stone's opinion on that later. I think if you're over 50, it might be more like 40 days, but I only say that because of my own experience as I get older. So the communication skills are important. My husband one day was reading out of the Wall Street Journal to me when we still took a paper edition of that, and I was getting breakfast ready, and he said, listen to this. Susan, it says that women use twice as many words to say the same thing as men. I couldn't help myself. I said, well, it's because we got to tell you everything twice. So the basic fuel for positive emotions, and positive emotions help people find energy, is to keep that positive focus. It creates an upward spiral of greater well-being, and change can provide an opportunity for a fresh start versus thinking of it as having to start over. There's an experiment in happiness, or positive thinking, that I love. Two psychologists, Jack Bauer and George Bonanno, interviewed people 6 months after the death of their spouse. And then they went back to see how they were doing and what their lifestyle changes were and how they were emotionally and on mental status testing 2 years later. The people doing the best were the people that in the original interviews had had 5 positive comments about their relationship with the deceased, their spouse, or their life in general, had 5 positives to every 1 negative. They were in much better space 2 years later. So the positive energy and positive emotions are really, really important. Winding up, I would remind you all, and you know this, but life gives us multiple opportunities for renewal. We have to watch for them. We have to be paying attention. And there are no limitations on the number of times you get to reinvent yourself. So if you don't know how to reinvent yourself or what you want to be remembered for in your life, I would invite you to do kind of a bizarre exercise of sitting down and drafting your own obituary. for the newspaper. And if what you want to be said about you and remembered about you and your legacy is not already in place, and you're over the age of 60, then you need to get started on it. Because by a certain time in the lifespan, our warranty is up, right? And we begin to have parts failures and other things. So really give some thought, and that sounds like a bizarre exercise, but it might help you sort of focus what you want to do on that. There is always another opportunity to reinvent yourself. So our action steps. You're going to identify those 5 signature strengths from the page 39 of your booklet over the next couple of days. And if you have someone who lives in the same house with you or in a family who knows you well, ask them to circle your 5 strengths and see what the overlap or the variance is. They may have an insight that you don't have about yourself. And then choose the JOLT method, just one little thing to frame positively to make a sustainable change in who you are and how you want to look at yourself in the world. And then decide who you will partner with, whether that's an organization or an outreach effort or someone in your family that holds you accountable for a new exercise plan, whatever that is. Who are the partners that you can trust to help you in your journey to make sustainable change? And do that, and then you kind of need to make those decisions in the next few days to few weeks to keep your resolve in place and let you get started on these habits to becoming more resilient. So you can look good and be cool, whether or not it's the way you saw yourself 20 years ago. It's good to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.